As organizations look for strategic direction on the Internet of Things, it's their developers who are likely to be the strongest advocates for sifting out which technologies and standards can provide the best competitive edge. Andy Stanford-Clark is the chief technologist for Smarter Energy in IBM's consulting business in energy and utilities. He's also an IBM Distinguished Engineer and a master inventor, which he says means he has quite a lot of patents. Stanford-Clark is also known for creating the IoT Connectivity Protocol, MQTT. Stanford-Clark is scheduled to keynote at the EclipseCon Europe 2014 event, where he will discuss the importance of the Internet of Things to the development community. Developers from about 30 countries are expected to attend the event. Most work for companies and enterprises that build commercial products or internal tools based on the Eclipse framework, such as BIRT. Actuate got a chance to catch up with Stanford-Clark and chat about the Internet of Things and where developers should focus their efforts.
The purpose of our call, obviously, is to talk about the Internet of Things and your presentation at the EclipseCon Europe event coming up. I wanted to discuss, first off, your general overview of the Internet of Things and what kind of impact that is having on the businesses that you're working with.
Okay, so I've actually been working in what we now call the Internet of Things for about 15 years. Back in 1998, I moved back to the UK from 3 years in the US and started working on remote telemetry systems for oil and gas pipelines, or SCADA or SCADA systems. And it quickly became apparent that we needed to create something which brought that industry into what was then the modern world of TCP/IP and packet switch networks and so on. So I developed a protocol called MQTT, which I'm sure we'll come back to later, but that was something I developed in, as I say, 1998. And the good news is this year it's about to become an OASIS standard. So finally it's made it through all the hurdles and the amount of market penetration and so on to get to a stage where we can standardize it. That's very exciting for me. But along the way, over the 15 years, we've called things remote telemetry, pervasive computing, ubiquitous computing, Ubicomp, Tier 0, M2M, it's still around. IBM came up with this term Smarter Planet about 6 years ago, where we talk about instrumented, interconnected, intelligent devices in the world. And that was effectively our name back then for what is now the Internet of Things. That term has now taken over and has become the sort of lingua franca for all that stuff. So largely the same things as we've been doing all along, but a shiny new name for it. And the Internet of Things is the current buzzword du jour for that technology. So nothing new here, but in terms of the penetration and people's understanding of it and the divergence of products and services and thinking and ideas and companies all over the world, wherever you look, that's the really exciting thing about the Internet of Things. It's really snowballed into something which is kind of on everyone's lips, everyone's thinking about it, and people are understanding where it fits into their world and what the benefits of it are and how you can integrate data from lots of different sensors to provide better services for the public or for your clients or whatever it is. So that's kind of sets the context.
And thank you for identifying it as such. I mean, yes, we talk about machine to machine, several years prior to, a notion or a generalized notion of Internet of Things or Internet of Everything. And there's been RFID communications, GPSs, sensor arrays, etc. So where do you feel the tipping point has come for everybody to acknowledge this? And do you have richer conversations now that people are getting their heads around what Internet of Things might mean to their organizations?
Yes, I think the tipping point has really been commoditization of technology. So when I started doing this stuff for real, I started doing my own home automation and home energy monitoring stuff, which was about 10 years ago. I was hand soldering all the circuit boards and inventing the sensors and link it all together by hand. Whereas now you can buy off the shelf very cheaply a home energy monitor and link it up to the internet and get the data from it in a nice JSON feed or MQTT data or whatever it is. And So that really becomes a tipping point. It's moved from the domain of the rich geeky guy to anybody to be able to go out and buy this stuff and start to integrate stuff into their home without needing a PhD in computer science or electronics to get it all working together. So that's really been the tipping point from my point of view. In terms of richness of conversation, people are starting to first of all, people are starting to look at applications in a broader context than what they did as traditional client-server or web e-business. Starting to think about an agenda around mobile computing, social media, the analytics that wrap around that, the idea of hosting services in the cloud. So part of the system is kind of out there in the field, and the other part is up in the cloud. And you just kind of assume you've got ubiquitous connectivity to get to it. So that broadens the scope of people's thinking about how they interact with their customers, their clients, their employees, the rest of the world. And people are starting to think about what is my Internet of Things agenda, what's the strategy for the next few years. So rather than building, say, an app to access your banking system, you start to think in a much broader context about how does the Internet of Things, I'll include mobile brackets with that as well, start to become integrated into the whole business context. And to my thinking, that becomes real when a real-world event becomes a business event in the enterprise. So something kicks off a work process or a transaction, something in your enterprise messaging system, which was caused by some event picked up from some sensor or an RFID tag read or a person's phone entering a geofence or whatever it is out in the real world.
And then specifically, your expertise has been within the energy systems and utilities as such. Anything specific there that's made a shift now that people are, connecting the dots for these Internet of Things?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I see smart energy as being a sort of an application of the Internet of Things. So I happen to have specialised in the energy sector for the last few years. That in itself is a sort of a subset of smarter cities, which then is part of the smarter planet kind of agenda. So it kind of fits nicely, a set of Russian dolls inside each other. But it's all Internet of Things, really. And the interesting thing from my point of view there is that the smart grid that we talk about isn't one thing. It's a whole load of things, a really heterogeneous mix of sensors, actuators, people, things, components from different manufacturers like solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicles, grid storage mechanisms, all that stuff in order to operate holistically as a grid system. All needs to be instrumented, interconnected, and then use intelligent algorithms to model the activity, the behavior of those things, bringing information like weather forecast and demand forecast and so on, and run the whole thing as one big holistic system, which of course means you've got to have sensors on everything all connected into either central systems or more likely federated hubs of information to make intelligent decisions about how to operate components on the grid in order to make the whole thing work as one big happy system. So that's really, to my mind, the smart grid is a classic example of how the Internet of Things needs to come together across this really heterogeneous mix of different manufacturers, mix of different devices, in order to make an ecosystem operate holistically.
Thank you. Can you provide a concrete example of how IoT is succeeding in this today? I mean, do you have a personal favorite, something maybe you've worked on, or something that a partner might be doing? In terms of IoT at scale, I don't really have any good examples, but one area that's very close to my heart is home energy monitoring and some of the sort of spin-off things you can do within the home to get further insights. So, for example, if you're monitoring the appliances in my house, you might notice that the TV's on or the kettle's been on to make a cup of tea or something, and that's kind of interesting, but not particularly valuable. But if you're monitoring, say I'm monitoring my aging parents, and their system's wired up as well in their house, and at 10 o'clock I get a text saying, hey, your mum and dad didn't have a cup of tea yet today, maybe we should give them a call. So you start to get into this sort of
remote monitoring of elderly or sick or people who have difficulty coping with normal life, being able to not monitor them electronically, but to get a heads up when something's maybe amiss, that you can intervene more rapidly. And I think there's a huge potential there in terms of if a window's been left open, maybe if the front door opens in the middle of the night, maybe something bad's happening, just to be aware of those things happening. If you're away from home, say or monitoring your holiday home, if you have one of those, just to find out what's going on. So build that picture of information derived from the data. And it might be completely innocent, or it might be something that you actually need to know about. And rather than getting deluged with tons and tons of information, all the little data points, you actually get meaningful notifications. We term it actionable insights. So this means you take data, transform it into information and knowledge about what's happening, and then if something important happens that you should know about, we create an actionable insight, which is maybe a text alert or a tweet or a red flashing light in my room, or maybe a notification to my car dashboard, something which tells me there's something happening that I should know about. And that to me is a really exciting sort of multi-dimensional opportunity for the Internet of Things, which is really just emerging at the moment.
Thank you. In terms of those actionable items, what part do you feel that visualizations and dashboards can play in the success of those Internet of Things developments?
So what I'm seeing is that dashboards and visualizations are extremely important to understand the data in the first place. So remember I talked about the 3 I's of instrumented, interconnected, intelligent. The first step of intelligence is to know what's going on. And we found visualization in various forms, from traditional graphs through ambient devices, a glowing orb device in my house that shows me red, amber or green, how much power we're using, through to things like tweets, which obviously are a form of visualization of information in a textual form, through to banks of multicolored LEDs, which have a picture of data rippling across them to give you real-time information. All that stuff gives you an understanding of what's happening, and I found that very valuable to then develop the algorithms so the computer can sit and watch those dashboards and those lights for me to give me those actionable insights to send me the notifications and so on. So it's just kind of like a first step in understanding the data is to look at it, visualize it, graph it up, and see what's happening, and then you can say, okay, we're seeing that kind of spike or that kind of ramp, that kind of event happening. I can see how to program the computer to define some rules to look for that kind of thing. In a wider context, being able to see what's happening is extremely important, and converting the data into numbers. I've used the horrible cliche, picture's worth 1,000 words, but it really, really is. And watching visual information is far more likely to see the anomalies and the information that you're trying to see if it's in some kind of visual form.
I'm going to switch a little tack to focus on what the developers, because obviously at EclipseCon you have people who are very passionate about building these systems, building these tools. Talk a little bit about what would you say are the key programming or developer tools for those people who are looking for success in the Internet of Things? Which kinds of projects and or technology should they be focused on?
Quite a broad question. So I guess I'll touch on a number of things. One would be more agile methods of development, so trying things out in short bursts and actually putting them in front of customers to try them out to get feedback immediately and then iterate on that. So start simple, iterate fast kind of development. One would be the use of APIs and the simplification of those things using kind of apparently web services and JSON and REST and AJAX type interfaces, but standardization of interfacing and being able to absolutely assume that the functionality of that API will be as defined, and you really don't need to care what's behind it in order to use a service. And then another thing I think I'd talk about would be kind of the DevOps, closing the loop on development and deployment, which kind of fits into the agile context as well. But again, having direct access, get a much quicker path from development through to getting new software deployed on a production system. That's really what makes the world tick these days, and to streamline the operations, but keeping in place the rigor of library systems and versioning and being able to back out a system, or having test and pre-prod and all the different production environments, still very important. Being able to streamline that process. And the final thing I think I'll mention in terms of the term rapid time to value for developers is some great technology called Node-RED. And if you haven't seen this, you need to go and look at nodered.org, which is an open source development environment for the Internet of Things, writing applications for linking sources of data to destinations of data with some kind of transformation and routing in between. And this is an open source project developed by some guys at IBM here in the UK, and it really is wiring towards the Internet of Things. And the time to value for a very simple, say, an MQTT subscriber going through a transformation to a web services HTTP poster somewhere is minutes, maybe even seconds. It's very, very quick. So that's a great tool for developers to be looking at now, and that's Node.js runtime.
Thank you. In reference, you had obviously talked about MQTT and the acceptance by OASIS and the standards bodies. Are there certain standards that developers and their organizations should be aware of, and how should they be approaching this? Our understanding is that everybody likes to work with what they know, but not necessarily do they understand all of the ones that are out there. Do you have personal favorites that you feel dovetail nicely within IoT?
Yeah, we're in a sort of fascinating time at the moment where there's lots more standards than there needs to be. So it seems like everybody makes a. It's a bit like what do they say? Everybody knows that you need a toothbrush, but nobody wants to use somebody else's. So that's how standards are. So certainly there need to be standards, and in terms of the interoperability of Internet of Things systems, very much the standards need to be in place so that systems can interoperate. Otherwise, we'll end up with what we're seeing in some of the early IoT forays, where you've got very much sort of end-to-end applications from the sensor right through to the back-end web service and the notifications or the web interface it delivers, but completely siloed and completely incompatible and non-interoperable with the next siloed system. So you could end up with, say, your home music center system not being able to interoperate with your some other system in your house, say the TV system, because they come from different manufacturers, different systems. And being able to break down those barriers and interlink systems at different levels is extremely important. And so the example in the home would be that if I'm monitoring energy usage, whether the windows and doors are opened, if the heating system's on, if those are all from separate vendors and all completely separately siloed, then I don't get a holistic picture of the whole house. Whereas if those three sources of information can be interworked and interlinked and sort of mashed up into a new application, I can get a really good insight into things like, don't put the heating on if the window's open, or I hadn't been in the house using electricity for a while, so maybe turn the thermostat back to a lower level. So that kind of interoperation is absolutely necessary. So my favorite, of course, is MQTT, the protocol for the Internet of Things, which has achieved great widespread adoption. I'm extremely happy and proud and satisfied with that over the last 15 years. It never ceases to amaze me how many people say, oh yes, it supports MQTT, or yeah, it talks MQTT over there. So that's really great. But of course, there are other standards and protocols as well in the Internet of Things space. I think the Eclipse Paho project standard is very important in terms of the end-to-end M2M stack, and we're seeing a lot of traction there with different people integrating different levels of the stack. That's pretty important.
And then my final question is, as you're going to be giving your presentation to the audience at the EclipseCon conference, there will be questions about how a developer or an organization can get involved in this. What are you telling people today about how to jump into this, engaging people through Internet of Things, and does IBM offer something specific towards that?
Yeah, so it's kind of like we were in the sort of mid-90s, where everyone's heard of the web. All companies thought they better get a domain name and set up their sort of first, this is my website kind of page, and just put a toe in the water, because they kind of got the impression it's going to be important, but they're not quite sure how yet, but they need to get involved anyway, so they're not kind of left behind when it all kicks off. So there's quite a lot of sort of feeling of that no one wants to be left behind in the Internet of Things space. But what I'm sort of advising clients to do really is to look at their existing processes and the way they interact with their customers, or their consumers, and see what would make a natural fit, a natural extension of existing processes into a sensor and actuator world. Because otherwise, if you come up with some completely random, off to one side, orthogonal thought about, we'll introduce this new thing, everyone will go, so what do we do with that? Whereas if it's a very natural extension to what you're already doing in your interaction with your clients, then that becomes a very natural thing. So a good example was how we instrumented the Isle of Wight ferries, so that they tweet when they leave and arrive at the ferry ports. And that was a very useful application for me as a commuter from the Isle of Wight to know when the ferries were running. And immediately it was picked up by thousands of commuters wanting to see what time the ferries were going, if they're running late, if they've been cancelled. And that led into a whole new relationship with the ferry company, with their customers, us the commuters, in terms of social interaction and social media. So you can now tweet the ferry company, ask when the next ferry is, or ask them a question about why the ferry is late, and they'll tell you, all triggered off by this Internet of Things sort of starting point, which said that let's get the ferry tweeting when they leave and arrive at the ferry port through instrumentation, through Internet of Things. So that's really my advice: is pick something which is part of your existing business and augment it with Internet of Things technology.
Fantastic. Anything else you wanted to add to the conversation before we close? If things that you feel that a developer audience or an audience who is investigating Internet of Things should be aware of?
I think it's really important for developers to get their hands dirty. So if they're sort of server-side type people, don't kind of hypothesize about this idealized IoT device that's going to connect in one day. Get yourself a Raspberry Pi, get yourself an Arduino, write some code one weekend, one evening, try it out, get your device publishing an MQTT stream back to some broker somewhere, and just understand the implications of when connectivity goes away, when battery life runs out, when the amount of memory on a device is genuinely restricted, rather than assuming that they'll have megabytes of storage of memory or gigabytes of storage and gigabytes of disk spinning at the device, when it's just a little chip the size of your thumbnail that's hanging on the end of a bit of a wet string, and send them a transactional message over that to say that something important's happened. That's when people really got to sort of get their hands dirty and try this stuff out. And that to me, and certainly the colleagues I've worked with to introduce them into the IoT space, has been the real wake-up call. Saying, actually, I can do this stuff. I can now understand. I can now talk about an end-to-end story, from the actual sensor, the actual physical transducer in the real world, right through to some back-end service, maybe cloud-hosted, leading to an actionable insight that when I press the doorbell, I get a text. Something that's really simple like that. And everyone should go off and try implementing something like that, just to get a feel for it. Because until you've done it, it's only a theory.
Thanks again to Andy Stanford-Clark for chatting with us today. Again, he'll be keynoting the EclipseCon Europe 2014 event starting on October 28 in Germany. As a gold sponsor of the event, Actuate will demonstrate its server software for creating dashboards and reports. It'll also be showing a special Internet of Things IoT demonstration for wearable technology. We look forward to seeing you there. Thanks for listening.